In a bustling corner of the city, where life hummed to the rhythm of countless footsteps and honking horns, there lived a man named Ramesh. To most, he was just another face in the crowd, an ordinary bus conductor in his late 30s, wearing a crisp, slightly faded uniform. But behind those sharp eyes and a warm, determined smile was a story that would inspire even the most indifferent of hearts. Every morning, Ramesh stood at the depot gate, his ticket pouch slung across his chest and a whistle in hand, ready to welcome passengers aboard. His bus wasn't just a vehicle to him, it was a stage, and he was the silent hero ensuring everyone reached their destination safely. He greeted passengers with genuine warmth, often exchanging a quick joke or a word of encouragement. His unwavering dedication to his job masked a life of struggles that no one could see, struggles that would have crushed most people. Ramesh's story began years ago in a tiny village tucked away in the heart of India. He had grown up with dreams much larger than the dusty lanes and fields that stretched endlessly around him. As a child, he'd been fascinated by the idea of breaking free from his humble roots and creating a life filled with opportunity. But life, as it often does, had other plans. The untimely death of his father forced Ramesh to drop out of school and shoulder the responsibility of his family. His dreams of becoming an engineer dissolved into the relentless grind of day-to-day survival. Years passed, and Ramesh eventually found his way to the city, where he took up the job of a bus conductor. To some, it might have seemed like the end of ambition, but for Ramesh, it was the beginning of something much greater. Beneath his humble exterior was a fire that refused to go out, a determination to rise above his circumstances, no matter how overwhelming they seemed. It wasn't just his unwavering work ethic that set Ramesh apart. It was the way he saw potential in every moment. On quieter rides, he would pull out a book he'd borrowed from the local library, devouring pages on engineering, technology, and mathematics. Passengers who noticed often asked, "Why would a bus conductor read such heavy books?" His reply was always the same, delivered with a confident grin. "Because this uniform doesn't define what I can become." But dreams, especially big ones, have their share of hurdles. Ramesh's late nights of studying after long shifts were often interrupted by fatigue so overwhelming that he'd fall asleep with his books open. His modest salary barely covered his family's needs, let alone tuition for advanced studies. And then there were the voices of doubt, friends and colleagues who laughed at his ambitions, telling him to accept his lot in life. Yet, with every ticket he punched and every mile the bus traveled, Ramesh held on to a hope that one day he would rewrite his story. The turning point came one stormy evening. The city was drenched in rain, and Ramesh's bus was packed with passengers eager to get home. Among them was a young boy, no older than 10, clutching a torn notebook and staring out of the window with wide, curious eyes. When Ramesh asked him for the fare, the boy hesitated before admitting he didn't have the money. Instead of reprimanding him, Ramesh smiled and let him stay. The boy, surprised by the kindness, opened up about his dream of becoming a scientist, but worried he wouldn't make it because of his family's poverty. That moment struck a chord in Ramesh. The boy's words mirrored his own fears and aspirations from years ago. It was as if life had sent him a reminder of what truly mattered. As the bus rolled through the rain-soaked streets, Ramesh made a silent promise, to himself and to that boy, that he would find a way to overcome the barriers holding him back. Little did Ramesh know, his decision to help that boy would set off a chain of events that would change both their lives forever. Ramesh couldn't shake the image of the boy from his mind that night. As he sat by the flickering light of a kerosene lamp in his tiny, cramped one-room house, his thoughts wandered back to that conversation. The boy's bright eyes, full of hope despite the odds stacked against him, reminded Ramesh of a younger version of himself. The weight of his own unfulfilled dreams settled heavily on his chest, but alongside it was a spark, an idea that he couldn't ignore. The city outside was quiet, the rain still pattering against the window, but inside Ramesh's mind, a storm was brewing. He pulled out his notebook, the one he kept tucked away under his bed, filled with sketches, formulas, and notes he had painstakingly copied from borrowed books. He flipped through the pages, each one a testament to his quiet determination. This wasn't just a hobby for him, it was a lifeline to the future he still believed in. And now, more than ever, he felt the urge to act, not just for himself, but for others like the boy he had met that evening. The next morning, Ramesh woke up earlier than usual, his resolve stronger than ever. He knew he couldn't keep living life as if his dreams didn't matter. After his shift, instead of heading straight home, he walked to a nearby community center where free classes were occasionally held for underprivileged children. The center was small, the walls lined with peeling paint and old posters, but it buzzed with life. Children sat in groups, hunched over books and chalkboards, their chatter filling the room with energy. Ramesh found the coordinator, a middle-aged woman named Meena, who had dedicated her life to helping kids from low-income families access education. He introduced himself, explaining that he wanted to volunteer as a tutor in his free time. Meena looked at him with a mixture of surprise and curiosity. "A bus conductor teaching kids?" she asked, not unkindly, but with genuine interest. Ramesh smiled and replied, "Sometimes the best teachers aren't the ones with degrees, but the ones who know what it's like to fight for a chance." Meena saw the sincerity in his eyes and agreed to let him help. That evening, Ramesh conducted his last bus ride of the day, his heart racing with a mix of nervousness and excitement. He had never taught anyone before, but he was determined to make a difference. Back at the community center, he found himself sitting in front of a small group of children, including the boy he had met on the bus. The boy's name was Arun, and he greeted Ramesh with a shy smile, clearly surprised to see him there. At first, Ramesh stumbled over his words, unsure of how to explain the concepts he knew so well in his mind. The children listened patiently, some more interested than others, but as the minutes passed, Ramesh began to find his rhythm. He used simple, relatable examples to explain math problems and science concepts, tying them to things the kids saw in their everyday lives. Slowly, the children started to engage, their eyes lighting up as they began to understand. For Ramesh, those sessions became a source of hope and purpose. Every day, after long hours on the bus, he would rush to the community center, eager to teach. Arun, in particular, seemed to thrive under his guidance. The boy's curiosity was boundless, and he often stayed back after the sessions to ask more questions. Arun's enthusiasm reminded Ramesh why he had started this journey in the first place. It wasn't just about his dreams anymore. It was about creating opportunities for others who had the same hunger for a better life. But as the weeks went by, Ramesh began to face new challenges. His long hours at work and late nights at the community center left him physically drained. His family, unaware of his tutoring efforts, started questioning why he was coming home so late. His colleagues at the bus depot noticed the dark circles under his eyes and teased him about spending too much time reading books. And then there was the financial strain. Ramesh's meager salary barely covered his basic needs, and buying study materials for the children stretched his budget to the breaking point. One evening, after an especially grueling day, Ramesh sat alone in the dimly lit room, his body aching and his mind clouded with doubt. He wondered if he was being foolish, chasing something that seemed so far out of reach. The voices of those who had doubted him echoed in his head, telling him to accept his reality and stop dreaming. But just as he was about to give in to despair, he remembered Arun's face, the spark of understanding in his eyes during their lessons, the way he held his notebook like it was a treasure. That memory was enough to push Ramesh forward. Despite the setbacks, Ramesh kept going. He found small ways to save money, cutting back on his own expenses to buy notebooks and pencils for the children. He started waking up even earlier to study before his shift, determined to stay ahead of the topics he was teaching. And slowly, word began to spread about the bus conductor who taught kids in his spare time. Passengers on his route started recognizing him, some offering words of encouragement, while others remained skeptical. One day, a passenger who had overheard a conversation between Ramesh and another commuter approached him after everyone else had gotten off the bus. The man introduced himself as Mr. Kapoor, a retired school principal who had spent decades in education. He had been moved by Ramesh's story and wanted to help. "You remind me of the kind of teacher I used to dream about when I was younger," Mr. Kapoor said. "Someone who doesn't just teach from a textbook, but from the heart. Ramesh was taken aback by the offer of help. Mr. Kapoor began visiting the community center, offering guidance and resources that Ramesh could use to improve his teaching. With his support, Ramesh's lessons became more structured, and the children's progress was evident. Arun, in particular, began to excel in his studies, his confidence growing with each passing day. But not everyone was supportive. Some of Ramesh's colleagues mocked him openly, accusing him of wasting his time and energy. "Why bother with all this when it's not going to change anything?" one of them sneered. Ramesh didn't respond, but their words stung. He knew they were wrong, but part of him couldn't shake the fear that he might fail, that his efforts might not be enough to change the course of his life or the lives of the children he was helping. The real test of Ramesh's resolve came on a day that seemed ordinary at first. He had just finished a long shift and was walking to the community center when he noticed a group of men standing near the entrance, arguing loudly. As he got closer, he realized they were parents of some of the children he taught, upset about something. One of the men turned to Ramesh and shouted, "Who do you think you are, teaching our kids? What can a bus conductor possibly know that will help them?" The words hit Ramesh like a blow. For a moment, he stood frozen, unsure of how to respond. The children, who had gathered nearby, looked on anxiously, their trust in him hanging in the balance. Ramesh took a deep breath, his mind racing as he tried to find the right words. He knew this was a turning point, not just for him but for everyone who believed in him. The tension in the air was palpable. The parents' voices rose with frustration, questioning Ramesh's intentions and doubting his ability to teach their children. Ramesh could feel the weight of their skepticism pressing down on him, and for a brief moment, he questioned himself. What if they were right? What if he wasn't qualified enough to make a real difference? But then his eyes caught Arun's, wide with worry, but also a silent plea. "Don't give up." Ramesh stepped forward, his voice calm but firm. "I understand your concerns," he said, looking at each parent in turn. "You have every right to question who I am and what I'm doing here. I'm not a teacher with fancy degrees, and I'm not someone with a lot of money or influence. I'm just a bus conductor. But I've been where your children are now, dreaming of something better, something more than the life I thought I was destined for. I couldn't make it then, but I'm here now to make sure they don't have to give up like I did." His words hung in the air, and for a moment, the crowd fell silent. The parents exchanged glances, their expressions softening slightly, but still tinged with doubt. One of the men, a laborer with rough hands and tired eyes, spoke up. "But what if it's all for nothing? What if they dream too big and fall even harder? Isn't it better for them to stay grounded, to learn how to survive in the real world?" Ramesh felt the sting of the question. It was one he had asked himself many times. But instead of shying away, he looked the man in the eye and replied, "Surviving is important, yes. But is it enough? Don't we owe it to them to at least try to give them a chance? They might fall, but they might also fly. And if we don't let them dream, they'll never know what they're capable of." The laborer didn't respond immediately, but his expression shifted, a flicker of understanding passing across his face. Before anyone could say more, Arun's small voice cut through the silence. "I want to fly, Baba," he said, stepping closer to his father. "Ramesh Bhaiya is teaching me things I never thought I could learn. Please let me try." It was a simple plea, but it carried the weight of a child's unyielding hope. Slowly, the tension began to dissolve. Some parents nodded reluctantly, while others still looked unsure, but none of them argued further. Ramesh exhaled, relief washing over him, but he knew this was just one battle won. There were still many hurdles ahead. The incident left a mark on Ramesh. While he had managed to calm the parents that day, their doubts lingered in his mind. He started questioning whether he was truly equipped to guide these children, especially when the challenges they faced extended far beyond the classroom. Many of them came from families struggling to make ends meet, where education often took a back seat to survival. The kids were eager to learn, but their environment constantly pulled them in the opposite direction. Arun, for instance, was bright and hardworking, but his father's health was deteriorating due to years of hard labor, leaving the family in financial trouble. One evening, After class, Arun confided in Ramesh. Baba wants me to stop coming to lessons. He says I should start working at the tea stall to help him. The words hit Ramesh like a punch to the gut. He knew Arun's family struggles all too well, having lived through similar circumstances himself. But the thought of Arun giving up his dreams at such a young age filled him with a sense of helpless anger. "Arun," he said gently, kneeling to meet the boy's gaze, "your education is the one thing that can change everything for you and your family. If you give it up now, it will be so much harder to get it back later. Let me talk to your father." That night, Ramesh visited Arun's home, a modest structure with crumbling walls and a single flickering bulb. Arun's father, seated on a cot and coughing heavily, looked surprised to see Ramesh but welcomed him in. Over a simple meal of dal and roti, Ramesh tried to make his case. He spoke about Arun's potential, his love for learning, and the opportunities that could come if he continued his education. Arun's father listened in silence, his tired eyes betraying the internal conflict he was grappling with. "It's not that I don't want him to study," he said finally, his voice heavy with resignation. "But what good is education if we can't even afford food tomorrow? I need him to work, so we can survive." Ramesh understood the man's pain. It was the harsh reality of so many families in their community. But he also knew that giving in to that reality meant perpetuating the cycle of poverty. "I can't promise miracles," he said, his voice steady, "but I will do whatever I can to help. Arun doesn't have to stop learning. Let's find a way together." The conversation left Arun's father deep in thought, and Ramesh left that night feeling a mix of hope and uncertainty. He began working harder, taking on extra shifts and cutting back on his own expenses to provide small financial support to families like Arun's. It wasn't much, but it was enough to keep the kids coming to lessons. Yet, the weight of these responsibilities began to take its toll. One day, while juggling his job, teaching, and his own studies, Ramesh received news that shook him to his core. The depot manager called him into the office and handed him a formal notice. "You've been distracted lately, Ramesh," the manager said sternly. "Passengers have complained about missed stops and delays. If this continues, I'll have no choice but to let you go." The threat of losing his job hit Ramesh like a thunderbolt. His livelihood was already stretched thin, and without it, he wouldn't be able to support himself, let alone the children he was helping. He tried to explain himself, but the manager was unmoved. "I respect what you're trying to do," he said, "but this job comes first. Fix it or you're out." That night, as Ramesh walked home under the weight of his manager's warning, his mind raced with questions. Could he really keep this up? Was he trying to do too much with too little? For the first time in months, doubt began to creep into his heart, threatening to extinguish the flame of determination that had carried him this far. But as he turned the corner to the street, he saw something that stopped him in his tracks. Standing outside his house were Arun and a few other children, holding up a makeshift sign that read, "Thank you, Ramesh Bhaiya." Their smiles, filled with gratitude and hope, brought tears to his eyes. In that moment, he realized that while the road ahead was uncertain and fraught with challenges, he couldn't give up, not now, not ever. The stakes were higher than ever, and the obstacles seemed insurmountable. But Ramesh's journey was far from over, and he knew he had to find a way to keep fighting, not just for himself, but for the dreams of those who had come to believe in him. Little did he know, the most pivotal chapter of his story was yet to come. The days that followed were a blur for Ramesh, filled with an uneasy mix of urgency and determination. The warning from his manager weighed heavily on him, and every shift at the bus depot felt like a ticking clock. His focus on his passengers and routes was sharper than ever, but his heart was elsewhere, at the community center, with the children who had come to depend on him. Every time he thought about giving up, the image of Arun's hopeful face and the gratitude of the other kids kept him going. Still, the balancing act was becoming more precarious by the day. As the weeks went on, Ramesh began to notice cracks forming in his carefully constructed routine. The children's progress in their studies had been remarkable, but their challenges outside the classroom seemed to grow just as quickly. Arun's father's health was worsening, forcing Arun to spend more time at home, and other children were facing pressures to leave school and help their families earn a living. Ramesh could feel the weight of these struggles, and it only made him more determined to find a solution, even as his own life started to unravel. One evening, while Ramesh was teaching a lesson on basic geometry, a sudden commotion erupted outside the community center. Startled, he stepped outside to find a group of men arguing loudly. Among them were some of the parents who had initially doubted him, along with a few unfamiliar faces. It didn't take long for Ramesh to piece together what was happening. A local contractor had come to the area, offering cash advances in exchange for labor. The parents were torn. Accepting the money meant immediate relief from their financial burdens, but it also meant pulling their children out of school and sending them to work long, grueling hours. Ramesh's heart sank as he listened to the heated exchanges. The parents were desperate, and the contractor's offer was tempting, especially for families on the brink of poverty. But Ramesh couldn't stand by and watch these children's futures be taken away. Gathering his courage, he stepped forward and addressed the group. "I understand why this seems like the only option," he began, his voice steady but filled with emotion. "But please, think about what you're giving up. Your children have so much potential. If we can give them just a little more time, they can achieve something greater, something that will help not just them but your entire family in the long run." The contractor, a sharp-eyed man with a calculating smile, scoffed at Ramesh's words. "Dreams don't put food on the table," he said coldly. "These kids don't need school. They need to work. Let's not waste time with idealistic nonsense." Ramesh felt his temper flare, but he kept his voice calm. "You're right," he said, surprising the crowd. "Dreams alone don't put food on the table. But education does. Knowledge opens doors to opportunities that can change lives forever. If we let these children lose their chance now, we're sentencing them to the same struggles we've faced. Don't they deserve more than that?" The crowd murmured, some nodding in agreement while others remained uncertain. Ramesh could see the conflict in their eyes, the pull between immediate survival and the hope for a better future. The contractor, sensing that he was losing his grip on the situation, raised his voice. "You think you're some kind of hero, don't you? Teaching a few kids for free isn't going to change anything. This is the real world, and in the real world, people have to make tough choices." Before Ramesh could respond, a voice rang out from the back of the crowd. It was Arun. "Ramesh Bhaiya is a hero," he said, stepping forward with a boldness that surprised everyone. "He believes in us when no one else does. He's teaching us to fight for something better. And I believe in him." The boy's words hit like a wave, silencing the crowd. For a moment, even the contractor was at a loss for words. Ramesh felt a lump form in his throat as he looked at Arun, whose small frame seemed to radiate strength far beyond his years. The contractor, realizing he had lost the support of the crowd, muttered something under his breath and left, but the tension didn't dissipate entirely. The parents were still conflicted, their expressions a mix of hope and hesitation. Ramesh knew he hadn't won them all over yet, but Arun's courage had planted a seed. He decided to take a leap of faith. "I'll make you a promise," he said, addressing the group. "I'll do everything I can to help these children succeed. I'll find resources, scholarships, whatever it takes. But I can't do it alone. I need your trust and your support." The parents exchanged uncertain glances, but one by one, they began to nod. It wasn't a resounding victory, but it was a step forward. That night, as Ramesh walked home, he felt a flicker of hope, but also the weight of an enormous responsibility. He had made a promise, and now he had to find a way to keep it. The next few weeks were some of the most challenging of Ramesh's life. Between his long shifts at the bus depot and his teaching sessions at the community center, he began reaching out to anyone who might be able to help. He wrote letters to local NGOs, met with community leaders, and even spoke to passengers on his bus, asking if they knew of any resources or opportunities for underprivileged children. Slowly, small bits of help trickled in: a donation of books from a retired teacher, a box of school supplies from a kind-hearted passenger, and even a small scholarship fund from a local business owner who had been moved by Ramesh's story. But the challenges didn't stop coming. Arun's father's health took a turn for the worse, leaving the family in an even more precarious position. Ramesh spent sleepless nights trying to find a way to help them without compromising his ability to support the other children. At the same time, his manager at the bus depot continued to keep a close watch on him, ready to enforce the warning if Ramesh slipped up even once. The pressure mounted, and Ramesh felt like he was walking a tightrope with no safety net in sight. Yet, through it all, he refused to give up. The children's progress in their studies became his anchor, their small victories giving him the strength to keep pushing forward. He could see the spark in their eyes growing brighter, their confidence building with each passing day. But as the days turned into weeks, Ramesh began to sense that a breaking point was approaching. The obstacles were piling up faster than he could handle, and the weight of his promises felt heavier than ever. He had come so far, but the road ahead seemed impossible. And as he stood on the edge of a storm, he couldn't help but wonder, would his determination be enough to carry him and the children through, or was he destined to fall short? The answer lay just beyond his reach, waiting in the moments that would test him like never before. Ramesh was holding on by a thread, but the fire in his heart refused to die. Every day, he pushed himself harder, juggling his responsibilities with a determination that left even those closest to him in awe. Yet, as much as he tried to keep everything together, life seemed to have a way of throwing curveballs just when he thought he could manage. It was during one of his evening classes, with the children fully engrossed in their math problems, that Ramesh received an unexpected visitor. A tall man in a crisp suit stood in the doorway, his presence commanding immediate attention. The children looked up curiously, and Ramesh stepped forward, puzzled. The man introduced himself as Mr. Mehta, a representative from the local education board. He explained that he had heard about Ramesh's efforts and wanted to see for himself what was happening at the community center. At first, Ramesh felt a glimmer of hope. Perhaps Mr. Mehta was here to offer support or recognition for their work. But as the conversation unfolded, it became clear that the man's intentions were far from supportive. "While I admire your passion," Mr. Mehta said, his tone sharp, "this setup raises some serious concerns. You're not a certified teacher, and you're running these classes without proper authorization. If someone files a formal complaint, this could lead to legal trouble." Ramesh's heart sank. He had never considered the bureaucratic hurdles of what he was doing. He had simply focused on helping the children. "I'm not trying to break any rules," he said earnestly. "I just wanted to give these kids a chance to learn." Mr. Mehta's expression softened slightly, but his words remained firm. "I understand your intentions, but rules exist for a reason. If you want to continue, you'll need to formalize this initiative, which means getting proper permits, meeting educational standards, and possibly even hiring certified teachers. Until then, I strongly advise you to pause these activities." The children, who had been quietly listening, exchanged worried glances. Arun, unable to stay silent, stood up.
"But why?"
"Ramesh Bhaiya is teaching us so much. Why can't he just keep helping us?" Mr. Mehta sighed. "I wish it were that simple, son. But the system doesn't work that way." Ramesh's mind raced as he tried to process the situation. He knew Mr. Mehta wasn't the villain here. He was simply doing his job. But the idea of halting the classes felt unbearable. How could he stop now, when the children were making such progress? And yet, the prospect of facing legal trouble was equally daunting. He promised Mr. Mehta that he would think about his advice and find a way to address the concerns. After the man left, the atmosphere in the room was heavy with uncertainty. The children looked to Ramesh for reassurance, but for the first time, he struggled to find the right words. "Don't worry," he said finally, forcing a smile. "We'll figure this out together. I won't let you down." But the truth was, Ramesh felt cornered. The pressure from his job, the financial struggles, and now the threat of legal complications, it all felt like too much. That night, he stayed up late, poring over online resources and trying to understand what it would take to legitimize the community center. The requirements were overwhelming: permits, inspections, curriculum approvals, and he had no idea where to begin. As the days passed, the weight of the situation began to show. Ramesh became more withdrawn, and even the children noticed the change. Arun, ever observant, approached him after class one day. "Bhaiya," he said quietly, "are you okay?" Ramesh forced a smile. "I'm fine, Arun. just trying to figure out a way to make things better. But Arun wasn't convinced. You always tell us not to give up, no matter how hard things get. Don't you believe that for yourself too? The boy's words hit Ramesh like a lightning bolt. He had spent so much time encouraging the children to be strong that he had forgotten to apply the same advice to himself. Renewed determination flickered in his heart, but just as he was beginning to feel hopeful again, a new complication arose. One evening, as Ramesh was finishing a shift at the bus depot, he was called into the manager's office. The manager's expression was grim. "Ramesh," he said, "I've been trying to give you the benefit of the doubt, but we've had another complaint. A passenger reported that you missed their stop this morning." Ramesh's stomach dropped. He remembered the moment clearly. He had been distracted, thinking about Mr. Mehta's visit and the growing list of challenges. "I'm sorry," he said, his voice trembling. "It won't happen again." The manager shook his head. "I've heard that before. I understand you're dealing with a lot, but this job requires focus. If this happens again, I won't have a choice but to let you go." Ramesh nodded, his heart heavy. He left the office feeling like he was walking on a knife's edge. One more mistake, and he would lose his job, the only stable source of income he had. The stakes had never been higher, and the weight of it all was suffocating. But just when Ramesh thought things couldn't get any worse, an unexpected twist threw everything into chaos. One evening, as he was preparing for class, Arun came running into the community center, out of breath and visibly shaken. "Bia," he gasped. "My father," he collapsed. "We need help." Ramesh didn't hesitate. Grabbing his phone and a few essentials, he rushed with Arun to their home. When they arrived, they found Arun's father lying unconscious, his breathing shallow. Panic coursed through Ramesh as he called for an ambulance, but deep down, he knew the family couldn't afford the medical bills that would follow. As they waited for help to arrive, Ramesh felt the weight of yet another impossible situation pressing down on him. He had promised to help these children, to give them a chance at a better life. But now, with Arun's father's condition and the mounting obstacles in his own life, he couldn't shake the feeling that everything was slipping through his fingers. The ambulance siren grew louder in the distance, but in Ramesh's mind, the questions grew louder still. How could he keep fighting when the odds were stacked so heavily against him? And with everything falling apart, would his determination truly be enough to see them through? The ambulance arrived in what felt like an eternity, its sirens piercing through the thick tension that filled the room. Arun's father was carefully lifted onto a stretcher, his frail body barely moving, and Ramesh held Arun close as the boy trembled with fear. The paramedics assured them they would do everything they could, but the reality was clear. This was a critical situation. Ramesh insisted on accompanying Arun to the hospital, knowing the boy needed someone by his side. The journey to the hospital was a blur of flashing lights and whispered prayers. Once there, the doctors rushed Arun's father into the emergency ward, leaving Ramesh and Arun to sit in the cold, sterile waiting area. Arun was visibly distraught, clutching Ramesh's hand tightly. "Bia, what will happen to Papa? What will we do if something happens to him?" Arun's voice cracked, and Ramesh felt his own resolve waver. But he knelt down and looked the boy in the eye. "We'll face it together, Arun. Whatever happens, I'm here for you." Hours passed, and the night dragged on painfully. Ramesh, despite his exhaustion, stayed awake, comforting Arun and offering him reassurance. Finally, a doctor approached them. His expression was serious, but not devoid of hope. "Arun's father had a severe cardiac episode," he explained. "We managed to stabilize him, but he'll need surgery soon. Without it, his condition will worsen." The relief of knowing Arun's father was alive was quickly overshadowed by the realization of what this meant. The cost of the surgery was far beyond anything the family could afford, and Ramesh's savings, modest as they were, wouldn't be enough. Arun's mother broke down in tears when she heard the news, and Ramesh found himself at a crossroads. He had no idea how to gather such a large sum of money, but he couldn't let this family suffer alone. The next morning, Ramesh made a decision. He reached out to the same passengers, community members, and acquaintances he had spoken to before, but this time, his plea was urgent and personal. He shared Arun's father's story, emphasizing how this family had already been through so much. "They need our help," he said, his voice raw with emotion. "Even the smallest contribution can make a difference." Word spread quickly, and to Ramesh's surprise, people began to respond. Passengers who had once sat silently on his bus came forward with donations, as did local shopkeepers and neighbors. Even the children at the community center pitched in, pooling together their meager savings. It wasn't enough yet, but it was a start. As Ramesh worked tirelessly to raise the funds, another challenge emerged. His manager at the bus depot summoned him to the office, looking more frustrated than ever. "Ramesh," he said, "I've received multiple complaints about you asking passengers for donations during work hours. I understand you're trying to help someone, but this is highly unprofessional. I'm afraid I have no choice but to let you go." The words hit Ramesh like a punch to the gut. His job had been his lifeline, and now it was gone. But even in that moment, Ramesh didn't regret his actions. "I did what I had to do," he said simply. "If helping someone in need costs me my job, so be it." Leaving the depot that day, Ramesh felt a mix of fear and freedom. He no longer had a stable income, but he also had nothing left to lose. He doubled down on his efforts, even organizing a small fundraiser at the community center. The children helped him put up posters and spread the word, and on the day of the event, the room was packed with people from all walks of life. Ramesh shared Arun's father's story once again, his voice breaking as he spoke of the importance of compassion and community. By the end of the fundraiser, they had collected enough money to cover the surgery. Arun's family was overwhelmed with gratitude, and Ramesh felt a deep sense of relief. But just when he thought the storm had passed, life threw one final curveball. A few days later, as Ramesh was preparing for his next class, he received a call from an unknown number. On the other end of the line was Mr. Mehta, the education board representative who had visited the community center weeks earlier. "Ramesh," he said, his tone surprisingly warm, "I've heard about what you did for Arun's family. It's inspiring, to say the least." Ramesh wasn't sure where this was going, but he listened intently. Mr. Mehta continued, "I did some thinking after our last conversation. While there are rules and regulations, there's also a need for people like you, people who are willing to step up and make a difference. I've spoken to some colleagues, and we've decided to help you formalize the community center. If you're willing to put in the effort, we can guide you through the process and even connect you with resources to expand your work." The news left Ramesh speechless. It felt like a dream, one he had never dared to imagine. "Thank you," he finally managed to say. "I won't let you down." The surgery for Arun's father was a success, and he began a slow but steady recovery. Meanwhile, Ramesh threw himself into transforming the community center into an official learning space. With Mr. Mehta's guidance and the continued support of the community, he was able to secure permits, improve the facilities, and even bring in additional volunteers to help with the classes. But the real twist came months later, when one of Ramesh's passengers, a kind-looking elderly man who had quietly observed his journey, revealed himself to be a retired philanthropist. Touched by Ramesh's story, the man offered to fund a scholarship program for the children, ensuring that they would have opportunities to pursue higher education. It was a gift beyond anything Ramesh could have imagined, and it reaffirmed his belief that determination and kindness could truly change lives. As Ramesh stood in the newly renovated community center, watching the children laugh and learn, he felt a profound sense of fulfillment. His journey had been filled with obstacles, but every struggle had led to this moment. And though the road ahead would still have challenges, he knew one thing for certain. With determination, anything was possible. Months passed, and the transformation of Ramesh's life and the community center was nothing short of remarkable. What had once been a humble initiative held together by sheer willpower was now a fully functioning educational space, filled with laughter, curiosity, and hope. The walls, freshly painted by volunteers, were adorned with motivational quotes and colorful artwork created by the children. Shelves were lined with donated books, and new desks and chairs filled the once cramped room. It was no longer just a place to study, it was a sanctuary for dreams. Ramesh had poured his heart into this journey, but he knew he hadn't done it alone. The outpouring of support from the community had been overwhelming, and each contribution, no matter how small, had played a part in shaping this new reality. Parents who once hesitated to send their children now stopped by regularly, offering to help clean the center or cook snacks for the kids. The retired philanthropist who had donated funds for scholarships continued to stay involved, visiting occasionally to share words of encouragement with the children. Arun's father, recovering well after his surgery, became another pillar of support. Though still regaining his strength, he insisted on volunteering at the center. "I owe my second chance at life to this community," he said with a smile. "And to you, Ramesh. I'll do whatever I can to help." Arun, once a shy and uncertain boy, now walked with a newfound confidence, proudly telling everyone how his bia had changed their lives. For Ramesh, the journey wasn't without its challenges. Formalizing the center came with responsibilities he had never anticipated: paperwork, inspections, meetings with officials. At times, it felt overwhelming, but every time he saw the children's faces light up as they learned something new, he was reminded of why he had started this in the first place. He often thought back to the days when he had to convince people to believe in his vision. Now, he saw that belief reflected in every corner of the room. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in hues of orange and pink, Ramesh sat on the steps of the community center, watching the children play outside. Mr. Mehta joined him, carrying 2 cups of chai. "You've come a long way," Mr. Mehta said, handing Ramesh a cup. "Do you ever stop to think about everything you've accomplished?" Ramesh took a sip of the warm chai, a soft smile spreading across his face. "Sometimes," he admitted. "But honestly, I don't feel like it's just me. This place is a result of everyone who believed in it, even when I doubted myself." Mr. Mehta nodded thoughtfully. "That's the beauty of determination, Ramesh. It's contagious. When people see someone fighting for a cause with everything they have, it inspires them to join in." Their conversation was interrupted by the sound of laughter as Arun ran up, a soccer ball tucked under his arm. "Bia, we need you on our team. We're 1 player short," he said, his eyes sparkling with excitement. Ramesh laughed and set his cup aside. "All right, but don't blame me if we lose. I'm not as fast as I used to be." He jogged down to the field, joining the children in their game, his laughter mingling with theirs as they played until the last rays of sunlight disappeared. As the days turned into weeks and the weeks into months, Ramesh began to notice something extraordinary. The children who had once struggled to grasp the simplest concepts were now thriving. Arun, for example, had discovered a talent for mathematics and often stayed back after class to help others. Another student, Priya, who used to shy away from speaking in front of the class, had developed a love for storytelling and was now leading weekly creative writing sessions. The center was no longer just about academic success. It was about nurturing every child's unique potential. One day, as Ramesh was organizing some books, he received an unexpected letter. It was an invitation to speak at an educational conference in the city, a chance to share his journey and inspire others to take similar steps in their own communities. The thought of standing in front of an audience was daunting, but Ramesh knew he couldn't pass up the opportunity. On the day of the conference, he stood on the stage, his hands slightly trembling as he looked out at the crowd. "When I started this journey," he began, his voice steadying, "I didn't know where it would lead. All I knew was that something needed to change. The road wasn't easy, and there were times I wanted to give up. But every time I saw the hope in a child's eyes, I found the strength to keep going. What I've learned is that determination isn't just about achieving your own goals. It's about lifting others up, about creating a ripple effect that can change lives." The audience erupted into applause, and as Ramesh stepped off the stage, he felt a deep sense of gratitude for everything that had brought him to this moment. The struggles, the setbacks, the moments of doubt, they had all been worth it. Back at the community center, life continued with its usual rhythm. But there was a new energy in the air, a sense that anything was possible. Ramesh had not only built a space for learning but also a foundation for a brighter future. The children who walked through those doors each day carried with them the lessons of resilience, kindness, and the power of determination. As Ramesh sat at his desk one evening, reflecting on the journey so far, Arun walked in with a piece of paper in his hand. "Bia," he said excitedly, "I wrote this for you." It was a handwritten note, simple yet profound. "Thank you for never giving up on us. Because of you, we believe we can do anything." Ramesh felt a lump in his throat as he read the words. Folding the note carefully, he placed it in his pocket, knowing it would be a reminder of why he had started this journey whenever things got tough. The story of Ramesh and his community center became a beacon of hope, not just in their town but beyond. It showed that with determination, even an ordinary bus conductor could spark extraordinary change. And as Ramesh looked out at the bustling classroom filled with eager young minds, he knew that this was only the beginning of their story, a story of dreams, resilience, and the unyielding power of belief.